Last night, WKRP on MeTV had the As God is My Witness, I Thought Turkeys Could Fly episode.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. I think it's one of the funniest things.
Because I didn't see it the first time. I was kind of like, oh, yeah, that seemed funny.
No. I
think it loses some of the comedy.
For me, as soon as the scene begins, I'm already laughing.
Yeah.
So just from knowing it. But what's also kind of different, and I noticed this watching Stripes with my daughter last weekend, the pacing of TV and movies 30 years ago to today is unbelievably different.
Exactly.
Hey, this is Krish.
Krish, hey,
Krish.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. We are talking about old TV and movies. That's what we kind of do on the podcast here until we get started and get into things that people may actually be tuning in for. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
We tried watching the original Ghostbusters with the kids, and it was like unwatchable for them. Like it was so slow.
The kids these days want instant gratification, like so.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how are you guys doing? Steven, nice to meet you. Like me and Glenn go back together for several years now. Like I think from the early cloud days, we have been interacting over Twitter and met a few times in conferences, once in Seattle. So nice to talk to you too.
That's great. Yeah, nice to talk to you as well.
Yeah. Krish, I mean, I think it's got to be the last time that we saw each other was that one time, we met at like a coffee shop, or no, we had lunch at some place in Seattle.
Yeah, lunch somewhere in Seattle,
Yeah, it was like, it's got to be like 6 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, definitely 6 years, 5 or 6 years ago,
Yeah, because I remember, I had this idea that I hadn't written about as like cloud was just started, that because there was this whole public-private cloud debate, and then I was like, we need like a confederation, and then you basically had already come up with the idea around a federated cloud model. So I mean, the good news is that I was right, of course. I also wasn't first, so but I'll take being right at least a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Welcome to Device Squad, everybody, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics, an Anexinet company. Device Squad, fighting crimes against enterprise mobility worldwide. Bad UI, frustrating user experiences, poorly conceived mobile strategies, we defeat them all. This podcast series will cover all aspects of enterprise mobility, including strategy, development, design, testing, and more. My name is Steve Brickman. I'm a mobile strategist and UX architect with Propelics. First, a brief history of the company. Founded in 2011, Propelics is a mobile strategy consultancy helping enterprises worldwide devise true mobile strategies and develop world-class mobile applications across all industry verticals. Propelics clients include large companies like Amway, Bright Horizons, Bank of Montreal, Dubai Airports, Family Dollar, DLL, Cintas, Merck, and many more. Propelics' menu of services includes 8 different mobile kickstarts, covering everything from mobile strategy and road mapping to MCOE to UI UX design to mobile testing strategy, along with soup to nuts app design development and support. Additionally, Propelics offers 3 homegrown enterprise mobile products. Today we have with us, and Krishnan, let me know if I'm mispronouncing anything, Krishnan Subramanian.
Yeah, you got it right.
Okay. And you are founder and chief research advisor at Rishidot Research.
Yeah, that's right.
I said that right. Okay. And today we'll be talking about primarily we'll be talking about cloud technologies and where the cloud landscape is at and where it may be in the future. Glenn, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. You have a much deeper knowledge of Krishnan's talents.
No, so Krish is, he's a super bright guy. For anyone who's not reading him or not following him on Twitter, he's a good follow. He's at Krish. And yeah, like we started interacting when there was about 7 of us on Twitter at the time, like, back, like 7, 8 years ago. And so as I was learning, some of what I was learning was through some of Krish's tweets and reading some of his work. So super smart guy. So really glad to have him on the podcast today. But Krish, maybe you
thanks
could.
a lot. Thanks a lot for this introduction. So, Glenn and I go back to the early days of cloud computing, when we used to discuss this, sort of like dissect everything and sort of try to understand where technology has been going. And those times, the discussions were like mostly on the technology, not much of broadcasting. It's more about conversation. So it was good old times at Twitter, and we have been discussing a lot about cloud in the early days, the public-private cloud debates and whatnot. So I'm glad to be here, glad to talk to Glenn and Stephen on what's happening in this field. Yeah, looking forward to it.
You're an ex-physicist? I'm just looking at your LinkedIn page.
Yeah, sort of like I was doing PhD in theoretical physics before I dropped out to do a startup. When I dropped out to do a startup, it was beginning of 2001, and you know what happened at the time. And my startup dreams went down with the Silicon Valley bust, and that's it. Then I changed completely from physics to doing system admin. Then slowly, like I got into IT.
So was like trying to figure out the birth of the universe and dark matter, was that just not challenging enough that you just thought that technology and startups was the way?
I started with something like particle physics and figuring out all those things to finally, like when I was doing my PhD, I was working on coming up with statistical models for superconductivity. At the time, like superconductivity was hot, and people thought the room temperature superconductors are feasible, and so investing a lot of money on that. So I was doing that. What happened was, at the time, all my seniors, like the people who finished PhD in the field at the time, they were going into Wall Street because the funding was drying up for physics. Biology was taking over. So all these people after PhD, they ended up in Wall Street. I thought, if I'm going to go to Wall Street, I don't have to go finish my PhD. Let's do startup, and jumped out. At that time, most of the theoretical physicists, like they were not getting jobs in academia or anywhere, so they were going to Wall Street. So I thought, okay, if I have to go to Wall Street, I can as well do some technology startup. And the timing was bad for me. Like when I came out, it was 2001 beginning. George Bush just became president, and everything started falling down. So I couldn't raise any seed funding, so I just thought, okay.
So everyone already knows that you used to be into particle physics, and then went to the startup world. And we know that you're the chief researcher at Rishidot, but tell us a little bit about that company, just to give people a bit more context.
Okay. Rishidot Research is like it's a next-gen analyst firm where we focus on cloud-native technologies or modern cloud-based technologies, helping enterprise IT and enterprise stakeholders understand where everything is headed. We sort of put our data in GitHub, put our research methodologies in GitHub, so that we have a more open approach to our research. We publish in different ways, like we publish blog posts, we publish research reports, we publish podcasts, video panels, and stuff like that to take our research to our clients. And we also help enterprise technology companies with their product strategy and go-to-market strategy. I have some experience doing product strategy at Red Hat and then in a DevOps startup. So sort of like I transfer my learnings during this time to startups and other companies who are in the field.
Why don't you go ahead and give us some more on your own personal background in technology?
Sure. I sort of like I used to do physics in the past, and when I moved to the technology field, I was doing system admin, and I'm also used to sort of believe in open source philosophy. I was a strong advocate of open source philosophy. In fact, when Red Hat came out with the Fedora in the early, I think 2000 or something, we started a community called fedoranews.org. I was one of the founding members of that community. We were advocating open source at the time. At the time, enterprises were not ready to use open source. There are not many vendors other than Red Hat pushing the open source software. So we were strong advocates of open source. When cloud computing came out, I sort of approached cloud computing as something that is antithesis to the open source philosophy. I thought maybe cloud is the way where you can lock in customers into proprietary technology and stuff like that. So I started digging deeper into cloud, and while doing that, I figured out that there is a lot of opportunity for open source software on cloud. Like for example, I could take open source software, tap into cloud computing, and I will be able to offer a service. So sort of I saw potential for open source and cloud computing. Then that's when I started playing around with Amazon Web Services and started advocating cloud in using blogs and other platforms. That sort of got me into digging deeper on cloud computing. And at some point, I figured out that instead of being an advocate for cloud, probably I should be more realistic and help enterprise customers navigate the landscape. That's how I started becoming an industry analyst. I started focusing on cloud related topics. And I was also looking at platform as a service as a right abstraction for enterprise cloud users. While doing that, I was running some conferences on platform as a service, and then Red Hat came up with a job offer which I couldn't refuse. So I was part of Red Hat OpenShift team for two and a half years or 3 years, a little more than 2.5 years, driving their product strategy and also evangelizing their platform with enterprise IT customers. After Red Hat, I went to a startup in the DevOps space, and the startup got acquired by another startup called JFrog. So after that, I'm back to being an industry analyst. This was my journey in technology over the last few years.
Speaking on journeys and kind of looking at that arc of what's happened over the last, however many years. I mean, OpenShift came out, NASA was using it, and that was going to be like a great way for to be able to have both public and private cloud options, but with the same basic platform as a service. Mm-hmm. But since those days, till today, kind of what have been some of the big trends and kind of what's hot right now?
Yeah, sure. Platform as a service was really hard in the early days of cloud computing because if cloud is about abstracting away complexities, probably it makes sense to take the abstraction to a level where you also abstract away some of the complexities with managing middleware and other application dependencies. So that's why platform as a service was interesting in those days. Then there was a sort of an iteration that happened where containers sort of came up, got the attention of developers because it completely solved the developer experience problem which people were facing in using cloud computing. So containers was once containers gained momentum, the next step was for the platforms to evolve to support containers.
Yeah, you said that the containers solved a big developer problem. Can you maybe talk about what that is? Give a little bit of context to some of the people.
Yeah, sure. One of the issues developers faced was once they publish their code to GitHub, then integrating with the existing code base and eventually making sure that it works properly. If it works in the dev environment, it should work properly in the production. So, but usually the dev environment is completely different from what they have in the production. That led to a lot of finger pointing between ops and developers. It created some sort of a bottleneck to the speed of innovation. So if developers can sort of put everything together, whether the application code, the dependencies, everything, test it on their environment and ship it over to production. And if it runs on similar environment without much change, then probably some of these bottlenecks could be removed, and that could lead to what they call as faster time to market with the cloud computing. So this removed the friction for developers to deploy directly to production, made it easier to sort of innovate much more rapidly than using traditional approaches. So as Agile and DevOps gained traction, the encapsulation was the right encapsulation was missing to take the code from developer laptop all the way to production. I think containers solved that problem from a developer point of view. If developers have to take the code, they run through the pipeline and sort of push it to production, there should be an encapsulation that removes the friction point, and that happened. And containers existed for a long time, but Docker sort of made it easy for developers to use containers. It sort of solved that user experience problem without adding any complexities. They removed all the friction. So that led to a lot of mind share among developers towards Docker containers, and that eventually led to Kubernetes and whatever we have today. So that's the way I look at Docker containers solving some of the developer productivity problems.
So actually, following up on that, like Kubernetes seems to have taken over the entire world. I mean, to the point that even Microsoft renamed their Azure Container Service to AKS, even though it still means container. But yeah, the K clearly stands for Kubernetes. So what is it specifically about Kubernetes that is so awesome? Like, why is it so important? Why has this become like it feels like it's like the key technology in cloud and development today?
Yeah, Kubernetes sort of like solves many issues. Even though containers solve some of the developer experience problem, it's still you still cannot deploy containers at scale and manage it effectively. Kubernetes made management of containers much more seamless by sort of like cutting down some of the fat associated with managing these containers in the traditional way. So since it came from Google, it was built for scale, and Kubernetes completely transformed the way you could look at deploying applications at scale, made it easy for any organization to deploy containers or applications at a scale which was not possible before. So I think the interfaces provided by Kubernetes was easy enough and programmatic enough to let organizations automate deployment, management, and even eventual scaling and bringing it down, kind of all the post day two operations. So that made Kubernetes very attractive. So it made it easier. You provided that standard interface which they could tap in. With that standardization comes the standardization actually gives the ability for end customers to take applications from one infrastructure to another without having to sort of manage all the complexities. That sort of like played into the portability mantra, which we were talking about in the early days of Docker success. And this gave confidence to many enterprises that with containers, Kubernetes, they could use cloud computing much more effectively without worrying too much about the lock-in scenarios. So I think that made Kubernetes more attractive to many enterprise customers.
How does Google Cloud play into this? I know it seems like AWS and Azure are sort of leading the pack at this point, but the Google Cloud platform doesn't seem to be getting much traction, despite some recent announcements at aiming more towards the enterprise market. What are your thoughts on this?
My personal thoughts, like Google Cloud is it's pretty good from a technology point of view. Like if you look at some of their data services, like they are really awesome. So in terms of technology, Google Cloud is well positioned to sort of compete against both AWS and Azure. What Google lacks is the culture they needed to sort of like get enterprise traction. They really don't understand the enterprise market as well as Microsoft or even to some extent AWS. that is what is dragging Google down. Like they sort of try to use the same culture they had with the Google search business, and they are trying to bring it to Google Cloud in the enterprise market. So that is not going to work. So there are some cultural issues which they need to sort out, and probably once they figure that out with their technology, I think they should be able to compete well with AWS and Azure. Probably they are hired to Thomas Kurian now. That might help them understand the enterprise market much better, and they may be able to compete effectively in the coming years.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to bring up the hire of Thomas Kurian. Who, for those who don't know, he's an ex-Oracle executive. To me, like this whole thing of trying to figure out the enterprise, there's so many people, especially in Silicon Valley, who have been selling to the enterprise for decades. That obviously some of it is culture. And they always say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. But you would have thought that this would have been something that was more easily solved, and maybe this is a step along the way.
Yeah, I hope Thomas Kurian could bring in that kind of culture that's needed in Google to figure out how they can sell effectively to enterprises. They cannot target enterprise customers like how they deal with startups in the Silicon Valley. They need to have a different mindset. They need to deal with enterprise customers in a different way. By that, I'm not saying you need to do like what legacy enterprise companies are doing. You can still operate in a more modern way while dealing with the enterprise customers. But they need to understand the needs of these enterprises. The needs of large enterprises are much different from the needs of startups. They need to understand that, appreciate that, and probably take necessary steps to cater to those needs. Once they do that, I think they will be able to compete effectively against AWS and Azure. Azure is definitely leading the pack in terms of enterprise traction, enterprise cloud traction.
Yeah, no, and that definitely came. I heard that same theme, I don't know, a couple of months ago in a A16Z podcast. I think it was Chris Dixon who was on it. He was making the point that Amazon probably has the most developer level mind share, followed by Google, and Amazon and Google have the scale and frankly not a care about making a good margin at the beginning. Just focusing on scale and advertising revenue kind of solve all things for both of those guys. But that neither of them, and Amazon was kind of first where, the first uses of cloud were done by developers just with a credit card, starting to do cloud type stuff without the enterprise really knowing about it. And so that kind of endeared them to the developers really early on. But yeah, Microsoft, has this history of the high touch support that when making a big purchase, the CIOs and the higher level executives, kind of look for, so that they feel better that they're not going to kind of be left out, in the cold should something go wrong or should they need help in figuring something out.
That's right. That's exactly right. Microsoft understands the enterprise needs much better than both the AWS and Google. In fact, the AWS has caught up in the last few years. Like initially, they started with the developer-focused mindset, but then they understood that if you have to deal with the enterprise, you need to have a different kind of relationship with the customers. What is sort of like making it easy for Microsoft is their existing relationship with the enterprise customers. They already have those relationship at a higher level. So that is definitely helping Microsoft sort of leapfrog. Even though Microsoft started pretty late in their focus on cloud, they could leapfrog and sort of catch up with Amazon just because they have those relationships.
Plus all the channel relationships, all the VARs and system integrators, as well as their own professional services, so that as companies are shifting from their on-prem solutions of whatever they are to the cloud, they've got those resources and skills to help make that transition for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, one thing that is helping Microsoft today is the way they handle these relationships. Google is still like early in building the relationship, or I would say Google doesn't have much relationship compared to Microsoft or Amazon. Between Amazon and Microsoft, there is a feeling. I've spoken to many of the partners of both Amazon as well as Microsoft. All these partners say that Microsoft knows how to deal with the partners. They sort of understand that partners face so many challenges as they go about helping the end customers. So they are saying that Microsoft understands that, they make it easy. Whereas Amazon is still like, hey, my way or highway kind of attitude. So I think that is what is actually helping Microsoft at this point. But I think Amazon can definitely bridge that gap and catch up pretty soon and emerge as a stronger enterprise player. But Google has a long way to go.
Yep. Yeah. So all this kind of brings me to an issue that is part of one of the reasons why you started Rishidot, and part of why Anexinet, from being a partner for delivering cloud services. What are you seeing in terms of the general challenges that enterprises have in adopting cloud? Like what are the things that typically come up that you try and help them navigate with research and what have you?
Yeah, the primary concern is always about the loss of control. Even as recently as last week, I was in my high school reunion in India, and I met a guy who is VP of infrastructure at a healthcare company in Southern California. I asked him, hey, cloud is like now all pervasive, and they have all the necessary certifications and everything needed for healthcare. Why can't you guys embrace cloud in a full-fledged way? What he says is like, yeah, we are fine, open to using cloud, but what bothers us is the lack of understanding of what is happening underneath. You have to take the cloud infrastructure as a black box. So if some security issue comes up, we will not know instantaneously. We will know only after certain days, probably a month or even more. So that is not going to help us with our customers or in meeting our regulatory needs. So what he says is like, we are okay with the losing control with cloud providers, but we need some visibility. We need some transparency into what is happening there. So that is still lacking among all the cloud providers, and that is hindering large-scale enterprise adoption. But I am assuming that as these cloud providers understand the enterprise needs, as they transform themselves, they will be able to help in bringing out transparency in how they operate. I think that will help change help change the enterprise mindset and help them adopt cloud much more easily. That is one of the challenges. The other challenge I come across is about the lock-in. Even though like lock-in at a certain level is unavoidable, all the enterprise decision makers, they want to have the flexibility to move their application across multiple cloud providers. So multi-cloud is fast becoming a norm.
So how do companies use multiple cloud providers without impacting the user experience provided by a single cloud provider?
So they want to have the flexibility of using cloud like how they use with a single cloud provider, but across multiple providers in the mix. So that problem is not solved. As orchestration of services, management of services across cloud providers, these are not solved problem yet. Some organizations, both startups and large organizations, are looking into solving it. Once they solve some of these issues associated with multi-cloud management, the concern will go down, and you will see more adoption of multiple cloud providers.
Yeah, on both of those, there's an irony to them. One, like, what happens when there's disruption? How do I know what's going on? And how quickly will it get resolved? That starts with almost a premise that it's better to know what's happening than to have enough resources to resolve it quickly. Because one of the things about the cloud with Amazon or Azure or Google, I mean, you've got literally thousands of people kind of managing and monitoring that infrastructure and are at the ready to resolve, an issue when it arises, because they have these, 5 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines, reliability SLAs. When you look at, any company individually who has been doing on-prem, that's really their alternative. Sometimes they have, 4 or 5 people monitoring their own infrastructure, who are generally going to be less old, less breadth of expertise, and just not be able to move as quickly as a cloud provider. And in the same way, the multi-cloud thing, like I get that, you don't want to have lock-in. Again, going back to the OpenShift days, that was one of the great ideas, because you could deploy OpenShift as a PaaS on whichever cloud provider that you had, or even on premise. And so you kind of kept some of that risk. But it isn't a big part of the risk around wanting multiple providers, like the odds of either Microsoft, Amazon, or Google going away, from like a huge risk level is if not zero, seriously close to zero. And with cloud and your ability to deploy and fail over to different regions, if there's a problem here, you just spin up, a new instance somewhere else where there's, in another region that is not a problem. So doesn't that fill some of that gap of needing to have a multi-cloud strategy, or is that still a problem that we should be solving, and why?
Yes, you're right. Like there is a disconnect between how enterprises perceive multi-cloud versus the real value in multi-cloud. Most of them sort of think of multi-cloud in terms of the lock-in risk, and they want to have a flexibility in using multiple cloud providers as failover. In my opinion, that this is what I tell my clients, and this is what I also advocate in all the public forums, is that if you are approaching multi-cloud from the point of view of high availability or disaster recovery or things like that, you're doing it wrong. Like the costs are going to shoot up big time if you're going to fail over another cloud provider to ensure higher levels of availability. You're going to spend a lot more than what you will spend even by having all these on your own data centers. So I tell them, look at, when I talk about multi-cloud to my clients, what I tell them is, look at multi-cloud as having access to multiple cloud providers for the services they offer for your applications. For example, Google might offer some services that are much more suitable for my AI-related applications, whereas Microsoft could be offering some services like, for example, high memory HANA instances or things like that for my legacy applications. So I might want to use different cloud providers for different applications. If I am going to use different cloud providers for failover of a single application, then I am doing it wrong. So enterprises should be approaching multi-cloud from the point of view of giving their developers the flexibility to pick any service that is needed for their application, rather than using one cloud provider as a failover for another cloud provider. I think that's where the disconnect is. And I think right now, all the multi-cloud talk in the enterprises totally coming from the hype around multi-cloud. Soon people will realize that using multi-cloud in a HA use case makes very little sense. And probably using multi-region will make more sense. Or in some cases, just multiple availability zones are enough. So I think the conversation, people will understand it eventually, and the conversation will come down to giving the right service for the developers from any cloud provider, so that the developers can take advantage of the service that is available to build their own app. This becomes even more interesting from the context of microservices, because as smaller teams build their own services, probably you should give them the flexibility to pick the right for right data service or right the tooling that are needed for their application. I think from that angle, multi-cloud makes more sense, and, not from a HA point of view.
Right. Some of what you said also reflects on a client that I was at just recently, who's in financial services, pretty conservative from that perspective, and has not really used cloud to any great extent, because of these different concerns. But those concerns are generally not coming from the IT teams.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even necessarily coming from security. It's either from the business or the compliance teams.
Mm-hmm.
So we had some interesting conversations about this, especially as the use of cloud services relates to the delivery of mobile applications, which is why we were there. But yeah, like if you have any magic words that you've used to try and educate those non-technical groups who are very risk averse, but it's in some ways not as technically adept to kind of understand the nuance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Sure. Yeah, I would say that cloud providers have much better capability in terms of handling the underlying infrastructure, handling all the security issues than what you can have in-house. So it makes complete sense, or it makes you smarter if you use cloud computing than running everything in-house, thinking that you will be able to manage everything much better than cloud providers. The kind of expertise cloud providers have is unmatched, and there is no way any single organization can get that kind of expertise and handle everything in-house. So the question of whether cloud is the right fit for my organization shouldn't even come in. But the concerns coming from some of the executives or even the compliance team are valid. So they want some better visibility into how the cloud providers are operating, and they want to make sure that if something goes wrong, they know it first and they know it fast. So to do that, they should be using their leverage as a customer with the cloud providers to gain some kind of transparency in how cloud providers handle all these issues. I think that's doable. Like now, cloud providers are also realizing that the relationship with the customer cannot be based on a REST API, and there needs to be some humans involved. I think that the customers should leverage that and make sure they gain visibility into how the underlying infrastructure works, and also like force the cloud providers to be more transparent in notifying them of anything that has gone wrong. I think it's doable. They just need to have a mindset change. Instead of having a conservative approach to dealing with the infrastructure, they should think that, hey, I have the leverage as a customer to push the cloud providers to be more transparent. That will take care of some of my concerns. So if they understand that, I think they will be able to take advantage of cloud.
So it's kind of like going back to the early SaaS days where, in order to win the big enterprise customer at the beginning, it's like, oh, you want that feature? Sure, I'll build that feature if you buy. Yeah. Got you.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Hey, Krish, could you provide one example of where an enterprise might have adopted multi-cloud or might think that they need, several cloud services, and why that might not be the case, why they might be better off with a single cloud, or a case where multi-cloud actually provides some additional benefit? Just looking for some real world examples.
Sure. Probably now, like there is some sort of feature parity across all the cloud providers, but probably this is a conversation I had with an enterprise customer who had a multi-cloud strategy. This was a year and a half back. So at that time, they were large Amazon users, but they also slowly started diversifying some of their applications to Google Cloud, because Google Cloud had better machine learning and AI services and better big data services than Amazon at that point. So they wanted to take advantage of these services. Their developers were wanted to use the services offered by Google Cloud. So that's why they were having a multi-cloud strategy with the AWS for web applications and Google for machine learning and artificial intelligence related services. So that is one use case where I have seen multi-cloud deployment. Then another customer, they were a large Amazon Web Services customer, but the company they acquired, think that the company was using Azure. So they they decided instead of moving all the applications on Azure to Amazon, probably they should support both cloud providers, so that sort of reduces the friction in integrating these two organizations. So then they started embracing multi-cloud. So these are some of the use cases. And I have also seen people who are using multi-cloud for the sake of HA and all that, but I haven't heard any major success stories in that case. So all the success stories I have heard with multi-cloud are in terms of like probably giving developers the right cloud services or making the integration of post-acquisition much more seamless. So these are the trends I'm seeing with multi-cloud.
Great, thank you.
We've talked a lot about just like cloud in general, but one of the things, like if you're building cloud apps, and a lot of people are adopting Agile, you basically have no choice but to start doing DevOps, continuous integration, continuous delivery. So just like from what you're seeing, like I don't know if you have any specific research around this or just anecdotal evidence, but where do you think that we are as an industry, writ large, with the adoption of DevOps processes, especially in the enterprise?
Yeah, sure. The thing is, like I see if cloud is the fabric for agility, I see DevOps as the necessary thing to really maximize the ROI. So from that point of view, DevOps has been gaining traction continuously from the early cloud days, and it has become a norm in enterprises today. In fact, the State of DevOps report by Kim, Nicole, and I forgot the name of the third person. That is a very good resource for anyone to understand where enterprises are heading in terms of adopting DevOps. So adoption of DevOps has crossed that threshold point where it is seen as the normal way of doing IT. So we have gone beyond all the talk about culture. In fact, we as an industry spend a lot of time talking about the culture than the real business value of DevOps. So now people are understanding the real business value of DevOps, and they have embraced it as a part of their adoption. Even if they are a conservative organization, they understand that DevOps is one way to sort of remove the friction points and speed up the deployment frequency. So from that point of view, DevOps has reached mainstream. There are some issues that needs to be sorted out. I think they need to understand how the DevOps changes with the adoption of containers, how DevOps is going to be with serverless, and whether you will be able to tap into machine learning or AI to sort of streamline DevOps processes. These are some of the newer issues that are coming up where people are trying to figure out how to do all that. But DevOps in a general way has become mainstream, and I think enterprises are comfortable with the idea and they want to go with that idea.
Okay. Yeah, and Krish, if you could like maybe send us the link to that piece of research that you just mentioned, we can drop that in the show notes too.
Sure, I will share it. Like it's the State of DevOps by Kim, Nicole. It's a pretty good report.
So that kind of leads me to the tweet that rekindled our conversation here. It was about a couple of 3 weeks ago by Diego Oppenheimer, and he is the CTO of Algorithmia, who makes DevOps tools for machine learning. And so he was actually quoting another one of his employees, this guy Mike Anderson. Yeah, and the tweet was, expecting your engineering and DevOps teams to deploy ML models well is like showing up to SeaWorld with a giraffe, since they are already handling large mammals. So, it was humorous kind of on its face, but I think was trying to make an important point that there are DevOps is a mindset in some ways, but the tools and the technologies and processes can be quite different depending on whether you're doing DevOps for the cloud or DevOps for machine learning. So I was just wondering, could you speak a little bit about like what's so different between DevOps, in general for the cloud as we mostly know it, first how it's different for ML?
Sure. I haven't followed the conversation deeply to understand the context, but Diego has a point. The way you do DevOps for traditional cloud applications is slightly different from how you do for ML. With cloud, it's the DevOps process can be seen as code, build, test, deploy. Whereas with machine learning, the ML algorithms needs to be trained regularly, tested, cross-validated, trained again, tested, cross-validated. There is a separate loop related to machine learning that needs to be fit with the DevOps loop, DevOps, that infinity loop which we talk about. Sort of we need to fit this loop associated with machine learning in training the ML models into it. So that complicates the DevOps processes if you do it with the same approach as traditional cloud applications. So you need, you can sort of integrate the machine learning process, train the test, cross-validate, train, test, cross-validate loop into the traditional DevOps loop, but that will add a lot more complexities and it will be difficult to handle. So one way to look at it is to separate out the traditional DevOps processes from this train, test, cross-validate loop of machine learning, and probably find the right integration points so that these two work as two separate set of responsibilities. So we haven't come across any formal framework for that. Probably we are still in the early days of bringing together machine learning and machine learning processes with DevOps processes. But I've been thinking about it ever since I saw your mail that you want to talk a little bit about it. So I'm thinking probably the best way to do it is to separate out these two processes and have the right integration points to sort of bring them into the traditional DevOps life cycle. So maybe it's time for us as industry to dig deeper and come up with frameworks that will make it easy for people doing both machine learning applications and DevOps in their organization. So yeah, we need to understand the difference. You cannot have the traditional DevOps mindset and expect that you can easily merge the processes associated with machine learning models into it and expect the magic to happen.
Yep. Yeah, there are definitely tools like Diego's Algorithmia. So that's something that if someone's thinking about machine learning DevOps, go check it out.
Yep.
And we could put a link to both the tweet and the company in the show notes.
Sure.
So I guess anything else you wanted to touch on? I think that you had mentioned something in our chat earlier about either AI ops or autonomic computing.
Yeah, I will just briefly talk about the abstraction level going up above Kubernetes to serverless. So the serverless is going to be the kind of abstraction which organizations will be using more and more as we go into a more microservices-based cloud deployments. I think serverless has a pretty good fit there, and the abstraction makes it seamless for organizations to have that fail fast attitude and build applications leading to faster innovation. That is one topic which I am focusing on, serverless. It is going to be interesting. Probably we should come back a year from now and talk about it. Of interest for me is AIOps. AIOps in the sense that how can one tap into machine learning and artificial intelligence to streamline operations better. I'm interested in the topic probably because there are some interesting startups that are coming up offering solutions there. But more importantly, for a long time, I was enamored by the idea of autonomic computing. So even though IBM marketing jumped ahead of what is there in reality and started talking about autonomic computing long back, I think now we have the pieces that are needed to sort of see autonomic coming in the next decade or so. For example, Kubernetes has brought in a level of programmability into operations. Then with machine learning tools and AI services, when applied in the context of observability, these two trends will are pushing us towards that autonomic era, which I am foreseeing down the lane. So now, instead of using our traditional ideas about what are the thresholds we need to ensure to keep all the services running, you can apply machine learning models, look at all the data, observability data, understand the trends, and possibly take proactive actions in an automated way, tapping into the programmability of the underlying platform. In this case, Kubernetes, but with cloud computing, almost every platform is more programmable than in the past. So if we can do that, probably we could cut out humans and keep humans in a supervisory role and let the automation and the artificial intelligence do the grunt work. This will lead to large efficiencies for enterprises, and they can then put the resources they save into more innovation. I think that's the future I'm envisaging going forward. I may be doing what IBM marketing did long back, but I think that future is still a possibility, probably 5 years or 10 years from now. We have the right set of building blocks that are needed to build this autonomic computing platforms. So let's see where it goes. So probably this is also another topic you can come back in a year or two and talk about.
Sounds good. We'd always love to have you back on the program.
Absolutely. Glenn, thanks for taking the reins on this one.
Oh, no problem. And actually, before we let Krish go, it's like, I want to see if he's got any. Yeah, you have anything to plug? Anything cool that you're working on? I mentioned your Twitter handle of @Krish, but where else could people find you?
Yeah, in fact, on the Twitter handle, even though I own the Twitter handle @Krish, the handle I use is @Krishnan. That is the one where I sort of share my thoughts and all that. So you can find out about my thoughts on @Krishnan, and also you could read about some of my thoughts about the technology trends at stacksense.io, stacksense.io. Our company's website is rishidot.com, rishidot.com. So looking forward to interacting with all the listeners on Twitter. So ping me, and I'll be more than happy to discuss some of the topics we spoke in this podcast.
Thank you, Krishnan. Glenn, what about you? Do you have what's the ETC up to? Do you have anything you want to plug?
We're going to have our annual prescriptions for 2019. So it's prescriptions, what we think that you ought to be looking at, rather than predictions, which we are sure to be wrong about.
That's great. And I have a bit of news. I have a new series on Ars Technica, the Brickman predicament, my typical assortment of anxiety-based tech humor. All right.
All right.
So, you want to wrap it up, Glenn?
No, I mean, I guess my only question is, because we normally talk about this on just about every Device Squad podcast, but any chicken updates? How are they adapting to the cold front that just came through?
Well, chickens are doing great with the cold front. No issues, despite another hawk attack, and Tiny lost quite a number of feathers in this hawk attack, but still is able to deal with the cold. I did learn one interesting thing about chickens that I might as well bring up. Apparently, if you need to introduce a new chicken to your flock, you can just do it in the dark of nightfall. You could just put the new chicken in your coop at night when nobody's looking and they're all asleep. And then in the morning, they will all wake up and just assume that that new chicken has been there all along.
That is interesting.
Well, now we know why we eat them. Because we're clearly not very bright. So, and Chris, just so you know, Steve has chickens in his backyard, so they're kind of like a Propelics mascot and a thing, and so if you're confused as to why we're talking about chickens on the podcast, that's your answer.
Oh, that's cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for hopping on, and Glenn again for taking the reins. Really great conversation today, and I look forward to having you both on again very soon.
All right, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
All right.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Glenn.
And thank you for tuning into another episode of Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics, an Anexinet company. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
I was in India for the last 10 days, and I'm still jet lagged. So I hope I didn't doze off in between.
I didn't know that you just got back. We could have made this
Yeah,
for another time.
I came back yesterday, but the thing is, it's good. Like I wanted to do it. This is the way. This way I can keep myself awake. Otherwise, I would have by now gone to bed, and that would have screwed up everything.
Well, if you did doze off in the middle, your ability to talk in your sleep is really pretty convincing.
Okay.